Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this week's Quantum Sparks 20-minute micro class. This week, we're going to talk about factoring outcomes, a framework for decision making. Every day as agents and really as human beings, we're faced with choices. Some are small. Should I call this past client today? Should I post on social media? And others feel bigger, like should I invest in farming in a particular neighborhood, or should I hire an assistant, or should I double down on open houses? The truth is, every choice has an outcome, but outcomes are not just random chaos. They fall on a spectrum. At one end is impossibility. These are things that simply cannot happen no matter how hard we try. At the other end is inevitability, the outcomes that are going to happen whether we like it or not. And in between all that, there are possibilities, probabilities, and evitabilities. Where we get in trouble is when we confuse them, when we mistake a possibility for a probability, or we ignore an inevitability because it feels inconvenient. That's when disappointment creeps in, when expectations aren't met, and when effort gets wasted. Today's class is about learning to factor outcomes, to observe clearly, think deliberately, and make prudent decisions. When we do, we don't just react to life, we navigate it. We channel our energy where it matters most. We avoid the traps that we can prevent, and we prepare for the certainties that we just can't change. Because in real estate and in life, it's not about doing more. It's about making better choices, and better choices come from factoring the outcomes. So as a reminder each week, as we get started in today's class, knowledge is only potential. Action is where the magic happens. So get out a pen and paper, take some notes as we begin today's exploration of factoring outcomes. The opening quote today is, "The improbable does occur, but the probable happens constantly." So every once in a while, the improbable does happen, but the probable stuff happens all the time. So let's talk about why decisions sometimes fail. Usually decisions fail because a possibility is mistaken as an inevitability, or decisions fail because inevitabilities are completely ignored, or unrealistic expectations create disappointment. Today, we're going to talk about factoring. So what is a factor? A factor is just an element that contributes to an outcome. And factoring is breaking choices into components, like examining the factors so that we can make better decisions by understanding the little teeny pieces that make a difference on that spectrum to create the outcome we're looking for. So specifically, the 5 factors we're going to be looking at when it comes to figuring out the outcome, predicting the outcome so that we can make a better choice. We're going to look at impossibility, evitability, possibility, probability, and inevitability. These are the 5 key factors to making great choices. Why does this whole spectrum matter? Well, most importantly, it helps us make great decisions. And when we make great decisions, we reduce our level of disappointment because we don't experience disappointment when we make really good choices. It also helps us anchor our own expectations as to what is going to happen. Not only that, the expectations of other people who are relying on our choices. And making great choices expands clarity and creates resilience. So, quick definitions: impossibility. When examining our choices, first we have to understand the impossibilities. What pieces cannot happen? Then we have to look at the evitability. What are the components of the choices that we make where we can avoid disaster? Next, what are the possibilities? What is the range of conceivable within the choices we make? Then we have to consider measurements, the probabilities, the measurable likelihood of particular outcomes. And then we cannot rule out the inevitabilities. There are certain outcomes, or at least certain factors of the outcome, that are simply inevitable. And sometimes those are easily ignored so that the decision-making process gets all messed up. It turns out in a bad decision because we have ignored the inevitable. So let's talk about each one of these component parts. The first one we're going to talk about is impossibility. Impossibility is the boundary setting. So by understanding impossibility, we understand the limits of the choice we're making. So how do we recognize impossibility within the choice that we're making? Well, first, we have to just check against the laws of nature and logic. So, example, we're going on a listing appointment and there's some things that are just impossible. Selling a home for double market value is pretty much impossible. Next, we have to look at the rules and the system. Some things are just impossible because they're structurally or legally not allowed. For example, you can't just close a mortgage without signing a bunch of disclosures. Next, we have to distinguish between the hard limits and the soft limits. Like a hard impossibility is something that it just physically can't be done, such as maybe you can't make 30 prospecting calls in 5 minutes. Or a soft impossibility, which is something that appears impossible only under the current circumstances, but may become possible with a little bit of innovation. So, for example, one good example is back during the pandemic, many of us thought it was like impossible to sell a house by video, like going on a video appointment and taking our client through the property to look at it through FaceTime, for example. That was an impossibility. But now we see many houses actually sold like that during the pandemic. Next, we have to separate the impossible from stuff that is just really low probability, because there are some things that seem not probable, but it doesn't mean they're impossible. Improbable does not mean it is not possible. So, for example, it's improbable that you're going to meet your next client at Starbucks, just getting a cup of coffee, but that's not impossible. It's impossible to meet them if you never go out into the world and you just simply stay home. And then study the guardrail question. What outcomes can no amount of effort, strategy, or luck ever produce in this situation? So, for example, a buyer cannot waive the laws of lending. A seller cannot erase required property disclosures. Some things just can't go beyond the guardrail. So let's think about some of the examples of impossibility. And for example, listing presentation. What is possible? It is possible to go on a listing presentation and get the listing even against strong competition. What is the probability of that? Winning if you show stronger market value, showing a great presentation. What is inevitable? The seller will interview more than one agent. And what is impossible? Securing the listing if you don't show up for the appointment. So understanding what are the pieces that are possible, probable, inevitable, and then simply impossible. So impossibility is not about limiting your vision. It's just knowing where the walls are in the decision-making process so that you're not wasting energy banging your head against things that just simply can't happen. Next, let's talk about evitability, a second factor to consider. Evitability are the preventable risks. So evitability is probably the most underrated part of the spectrum because it's about what can be prevented with foresight. Analyzing evitabilities is like scanning for landmines before you start walking. Here's a couple of ways to examine evitabilities. Number one, look at past mistakes. Based on, for example, past listing presentations that you went on, what are things that you could do now to avoid the same landmines next time? Maybe looking closely at what can you do to prevent missing deadlines or preventing disclosures not getting signed properly. Those are avoidable. Next, identify the hidden risks. Ask, where are the weak points within your plan? So, for example, poor communication, skipping professional photography, skipping staging, things like that. Those might be preventable things that you could work into your choice-making process. 3, differentiate from inevitability. So inevitabilities are that some buyers are going to back out and markets will shift. Evitabilities are losing a client because you didn't follow up or missing an offer deadline. There's no reason for those things to happen. If effort or foresight can change the outcome, it's evitable. It's something that you can prevent. And then map control versus influence. Ask yourself, what can I directly control? What can I influence? And what is simply outside of your hands? Stuff that you can't control. The things that are evitable, the things that you can prevent, always fall within your realm of control or influence. And then run some what if scenarios. If this goes wrong, could it have been avoided with foresight? If the answer is yes, then it's something that was preventable or evitable. And if the answer is no, it's inevitable. So what are some things that are evitable? A deal falling through because a buyer wasn't pre-approved. That's easy. That's something preventable. Get all of your people qualified up front. Miscommunication. That can be all solved by written documents and written agreements. Marketing delays, all of that can be solved by having a template or systems that are ready to go. Of course, there are some things that are just inevitable. Last-minute lender conditions, bidding wars on a hot market, emotional stress is often inevitable. Let's next talk about possibility. This is a third factor to consider when making a choice. So, how do we identify possibility? Simple. We just have to ask, what could happen? Not what will happen, but what might happen if I try this. So, for example, if I host a seminar for seniors, I could get leads. I could build credibility. I could even form a niche market. List all the things that are possible that could happen if you take this choice. Look for hidden doors. Possibility is about being imaginative and open to outcomes that you haven't seen before. So, for example, posting videos on social media might not attract buyers, but it could also bring in referrals or speaking opportunities, things like that. Expand beyond the obvious. Brainstorm not just the most likely result, but think about what are the fringe outcomes that could happen when you delve into possibility. And detach from probability for now. The mistake many people make is dismissing a possibility only because it's unlikely. Possibility does not equal probability. So first identify the could, that's possible, and then later we're going to look at the probable. Possibility is not about measurement yet, although we are going to measure when we get to the probable. So let's talk about some examples of possibility in real estate. Possibility, calling 10 for sale by owners could get you a listing appointment. That's possible. Marketing, possibility. Mailing postcards to 200 homes could create neighborhood awareness in future listings. Education. It is possible that attending a class could give you a script that changes your conversion rate. Networking. It is possible that going to a Chamber of Commerce event could connect you to your next big client. So in short, possibility is the raw inventory of possible outcomes. It's not about measurement just yet, although measurement is also a factor that you have to take into consideration when examining choices. So probability is the measuring stick. This, where possibility is like opening the door. Whoops. Where possibility is opening the door, probability is the ruler that tells you how likely it is that each door is going to actually open. So how do you measure probabilities? Well, number one, you can just look at historical data. Look at your own past results or market averages. You can pull from market patterns. For example, on listings, how likely is it that this property is going to sell for 5% over market value? Pull the stats and understand the market reports. Next, probability, you can compare effort versus outcome ratios. So for example, track your activities to see which activities you do that consistently yield results. And then understand that not all probabilities are equal. When you're examining your choices, you have to know that some choices that you make or some factors are just long shots, but others are highly likely. Assign percentages and likelihoods to every potential outcome that you wish for. And when it comes to probabilities, most importantly, you have to factor in external conditions. So some probabilities shift based on a market climate. Hey, 2 years ago, you could totally list above market value and still probably sell the house. Not the case today. The market has changed. So your probability of selling a house over market value goes down substantially, only because the market has shifted. And beware of optimism bias. Sometimes as agents, we overestimate probabilities because we're simply excited. So probability is your measuring stick, whereas possibility is just the opening the door, the opportunity. Last, but certainly not least, we have to think about inevitabilities. This is so important because it's a piece that so many forget about when making a choice. There are things that are inevitable. That means no matter how much effort you put into something, you're not going to change the result. You're not going to change the outcome. Inevitability grounds your expectations and anchors acceptance of certain things that must occur. So for example, certain outcomes happen in every transaction or life cycle. In real estate, for example, deals always take time. It's inevitable that buyers are going to face emotions. It's inevitable that our markets are going to fluctuate over time. These are just constants. Also, you can draw from past experience to understand the things that are just inevitable. Inevitabilities often come from repetition. It's something that has always happened in similar circumstances, so it'll probably happen again. So, for example, if you're going to prospect for business, which hopefully you are, rejection is inevitable. Second, if you price too high, eventual price reductions are going to be inevitable. Next, consider systemic forces. Some inevitabilities come from laws, contracts, or physics that are things outside your control. So, for example, tax deadlines, closing costs, legal compliance, all of these are just inevitable. Next, distinguish inevitability from probability. We said this a few minutes ago when we were talking about probabilities. Probabilities are likely but not guaranteed. Inevitabilities are guaranteed regardless of your choice, your effort, etc. For example, it's probable a new lead will ghost you if you just don't follow up. It's inevitable that no follow-up equals no relationship. And then accept the unknown inevitables. Some inevitabilities are hidden until later, and that's okay. The practice is about identifying inevitabilities that you already know exist, because those are the guardrails of reality. So every decision contains these 5 elements or these 5 factors. The art is placing outcomes in their correct categories. So as you're considering the choices, knowing what pieces go within this spectrum so that you make the best possible choice. What are the common errors? Treating possible as probable, treating probable as inevitable, ignoring inevitabilities, and simply forgetting the things that are preventable, the evitabilities. So when looking at a decision or a choice, clarify what's possible, what's probable, what's inevitable, what's evitable or preventable, and what is simply impossible. Hope belongs to possibility, and expectation comes from probability and inevitability. Here are some strategies to use. Number 1, map the landscape. List out all the possible outcomes. I'm going to give you guys a worksheet that you can download at LAERrealty.com/quantum sparks. It'll be right underneath the replay of today's program, but I'm going to give you a document that will help you map this out. But list out all the possible outcomes, then assign categories: possible, probable, inevitable. Next, anchor your expectations. Avoid treating possibility as a probability, and make sure you're preparing for the inevitabilities, the pieces that are going to happen whether you like it or not. Then it's time to allocate your resources by probability. Invest in high likelihood outcomes and keep some reserves aside for those inevitabilities that are going to occur. And then differentiate between baseline inevitabilities. These are some things that you have to endure, like the real estate transaction takes some time. You typically aren't going to close in a week. And then the ones that are variable probabilities. These are little things that might occur, but not inevitable. And then anticipate outcomes. Visualize both success and failure. Identify improbable risks and inevitable setbacks. And then reframe disappointment. Failure is typically low probability outcomes that were realized. Challenges are inevitability fulfilled. And crisis comes from missed evitabilities, the things that you could have prevented. So strategize with guardrails. Understand the limits of the choices you make. The possibilities invite the opportunity to be bold, but impossibilities keep your ambition grounded. It's important to know both the possible and the impossible, and create a flexible plan. Adapt when probabilities shift, and plan for inevitabilities and prevent evitabilities. Future mapping is about creating a scenario or plan, a best case, worst case, most probable. By doing so, you can spot preventable risks. Life's outcomes are not just chaos. Outcomes are always structured. And the structure is built on these 5 factors: evitability, possibility, probability, inevitability, and impossibility define the limits. I wanted to give you one quick example, and then you can download the worksheet, the Factoring Outcomes Workbook, which is a really simple process for going through your decision-making process. But let's talk about the idea of prospecting for real estate agents, going out and prospecting for new business. Well, let's talk about impossibility. It is impossible to get results from a prospecting method that you're not executing. It is impossible to guarantee that every prospecting activity is going to yield a client. It is impossible to bypass fundamental trust building. So cold prospects aren't going to list immediately without some form of relationship. So those are the guardrails. Those are some impossibilities we need to be aware of when we're thinking about prospecting. 2, What are the preventable risks, the evitabilities? What problems can we prevent with a little bit of foresight? Well, number one, prospecting burnout is preventable by setting consistent schedules. So maybe you just set a 1 hour a day versus 8 hours once a month. Just 1 hour daily, you will prevent your burnout. Wasted marketing dollars are evitable with tracking systems. So you want to prevent wasting money, create a nice tracking system for any of your marketing. Losing leads to disorganization is also preventable with a CRM and a follow-up system. And negative reputation from a spammy type outreach is also preventable by using value-driven messaging. Those are some of the preventable risks when it comes to your prospecting. 3, possibility. What could happen if I focus on prospecting? Well, farming postcards, just sending out 200 postcards a month, for example, could bring in listing appointments. Open houses could bring in a new buyer client or potential seller leads. Social media reels could go viral, boosting your brand awareness. Networking events could lead to unexpected referrals. Sphere of influence calls could reignite dormant relationships. Let's look at the probabilities when it comes to our marketing and our prospecting. What is most likely going to happen? Well, it depends who you are prospecting to. If you're doing warm sphere follow-ups, people that you've already sold houses to, spending time there, there's a high probability of generating repeat and referral business from people who already know, like, and trust you. Farming campaigns. Well, now your probabilities are based on consistency. So there is probability that you can get business from a farming campaign if you are consistent with it. How about cold calls or door knocking? Lower probability per contact, but scalable with volume and consistency. Social media ads, variable probability depending on budget, targeting, and follow-up system. So understanding how you can increase probabilities through consistency, follow-up systems. And then last, let's look at inevitability. What are certain things that you have to prepare for when considering your prospecting? What's going to happen no matter what? Some prospecting efforts are going to fail. So not every call, mail, or ad converts. That's inevitable. Consistency over time is inevitable as the deciding factor. In other words, the one and done when it comes to prospecting, never ever going to work. That's an inevitable. So with all of the prospecting pieces, any choice you make, how you're going to prospect, consistency is important, because if you are not consistent, then inevitably it's going to fail. Market shifts are inevitable. So prospecting sources that work now may be different later. Client emotions and timing are inevitable variables. So not everyone is going to be ready to act when they are contacted. And prospecting is inevitably a numbers game. So more conversions equals more appointments equals more closings. So in conclusion, impossibility reminds you to not waste energy chasing guarantees. There are none. Evitability protects you. Build systems to prevent avoidable failures. Possibility inspires. Cast a wide net of methods that could generate business. Probability should direct your resources. Invest your money, your energy where your odds are the strongest. Your sphere of influence, your past clients, the warm leads. And inevitability grounds you. Accept that consistency, rejection, and market cycles are just part of the job, and then plan accordingly. Our final quote for today is "Chance favors the prepared mind" by Louis Pasteur. As always, you can go watch our replays of Quantum Sparks at laerrealty.com/quantum sparks as well. Today, I'll put that factoring outcomes workbook as one of the downloads that you can utilize to make great choices moving forward. Have a great day, everyone.